Fosi Audio just released the new LC30 amplifier speaker selector switch. And I know what you're thinking. Wait a minute. Doesn't Douk Audio have the one little bear VU3 meter switch that does the exact same thing for a cheaper price? Well, the answer to that question is yes. And guess what? I have both. So I want to do a comparison for you in this video because I think one of these switches well outperforms the other, especially with one particular feature that I think will help you make the right decision on which one you should buy. It's worth pointing out that these are amplifier and speaker selector switches only. That simply means that you can connect two amplifiers or two sets of speakers. For instance, if I wanted to connect the Yola horn and the Fosi Audio V3, or excuse me, ZA3, I could do that to either of these switches and change back and forth between the two. So each of these amplifiers would connect to the VU3 and I could switch back and forth between the amps. And the same here with the LC30, I could connect either here and switch back and forth here with this amplifier switch. Now the same would be said for two sets of speakers. If you have two sets of speakers, you could do it that way as well. Now, these knobs are not volume knobs. I think people get confused as to what the purpose of these switchers are. They're simply to switch between amplifiers and speakers. If you want a volume knob and you want RCA inputs, then you want a preamp. That's basically the job of a good preamp, with my volume control here and the ability to select between 5 RCA inputs that's on the rear of this preamp. So just want to clear up that confusion. I've seen a lot of people wondering why there's not volume controls on these or RCA inputs. And to me, again, that would be a preamp, while these are simply switches that will allow you to connect two amplifiers or two sets of speakers. Now, if you're trying to decide between both of these and wondering if they have remotes, the answer is both have remote controls. This is the remote for the LC30, and this is the remote for the VU3. There's one important factor between these two units if you're trying to decide which one you should buy, and that comes down to the performance of the VU meters. I've used both of these and found that the VU meters on one of these units well outperforms the others without having to blast music at an uncomfortable listening level in order to get any action at all. The best way for me to show you this is to simply run a signal through both of these and show you how the needles respond when both of these units' sensitivity levels on the VU meters are maxed out. So let's jump into that next. So the way I'm going to do this is, just to avoid any strikes, I've actually removed the sound from my speakers, but I'm going to send a signal through, and I have the volume control here on my Shit Saga Plus preamp. So when I begin playing music here, and just for fun, play a little Deftones. I actually have my subwoofer still in the system, so you may be able to hear some of that. But this is the needle. So now the song's really kicked in, and you can see sort of the action that I'm getting with the needles with the swing range maxed out on the VU3. And that's with the volume knob here on the Saga Plus, just at the halfway 12 o'clock mark. So as I increase that, you know, there goes the signal, right? So let me, and I'm going to turn this back halfway. So let me now set this up where it's going through the LC30 and show you the response difference. I now have the music playing again. You can kind of hear it kicking in there a little bit, maybe with the subwoofer. Now the volume knob is right here, and I have the sensitivity knob here on the LC30 completely maxed out. Now the manual says to do this slow as to not damage it, but it's completely maxed out. And the needle is barely moving. So right now everything is the same as it was, and you saw the response here with the VU3, and now there's just a real lack of response here. So let me crank this. So, I mean, I have this really way a lot louder than I want to be, and I'm now starting to get some response. However, if I was sitting here listening to music this loud, this is even just a 10 watt amp, but even in my small listening space, this is way too loud to listen to music. So I'm having to play it that loud just to reach this sort of response. Again, this is maxed out. And you could see how that even at this maxed out with the music down much further, we were getting much more active needle response. So that is really one of the main differences between these two switches if you're interested in buying them. Now, granted, with this test, I'm using a 10-watt amplifier, and I figured some people would probably say, hey man, like, it's only a 10-watt amp. You got to put some real juice behind these switches. So I got out my decibel meter and decided to take measurements of the volume level while I was testing these. And keep in mind that I'm actually holding this decibel meter behind the speaker, so it's not even really picking up a proper reading if I were where I would be normally sitting and listening. But you can see that when I am measuring the decibels required to really get action with the LC30, it's in the high 70 to low 80 range. The VU3 gives me great meter movement, and it's just in the high 50s, low 60s decibels, which is a much more comfortable listening level here in my small space. So I just wanted to point out those two readings between the two because I thought it might help further show that I am still getting a good amount of decibels and volume, even though I'm using a 10-watt amp. It still shows that I personally prefer the needle action that I am getting with the VU meters on the VU3 from Douk Audio versus the LC30 from Fosi. Well, I don't know about you, but if I'm going to buy one of these units based on the cool looking VU meters, I gotta recommend you stick with the OG Douk Audio VU3 One Little Bear. How many more names can it have? Switch. Listen, I love Fosi Audio. I've reviewed a lot of their great products here on my channel, but I think they missed the mark with the LC30 in regards to the VU meter response. Just like I showed you, it's really hard to get any action unless you're absolutely cranking the volume. And before you think I'm nitpicking, if you go read the Amazon reviews on this, you will see several people have already returned it for this exact same issue. They just have to turn it up way too loud before the needle starts to move at all. So if you already own the VU3, congrats, no need to upgrade. If you're trying to decide between the two, in this instance, go with the VU3. Now, I actually bought the VU3 2 years ago, back in 2022, and I made a video on how to connect this to your system because when you turn this little box around, there are a lot of banana plug options in the rear, and it can get a little confusing. If you'd be interested in learning how to connect the VU3 to your system, you can do so by watching this video here.